if you would allow me, I want to do a short exercise with you so that you have a physical experience what it means, polarities. Breathe in, don't exhale. What you notice right now, just doing only in-breath is doable, and also with your mind, you can put your mind to it, do it even more, and that's what we do in life. It's tough, isn't it? But you see, you need the in-breath followed by the out-breath, and the out-breath followed by the in-breath. If you only do in-breath or out-breath, you will die. They are interdependent. The real question is, how can we find the optimal balance between centralization and decentralization? What I need to learn is my boundaries. And I'm going to hold my boundaries by also saying no every now and then. So some people, there's also a fear. And the fear is that but if I don't show up as a strong person, they will see me as weak.
Talk to me a little bit more about polarity mapping.
I would say start with something that you're really proud of.
Relationship is my strength.
What happens if you overdo it?
Marco, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to come in today, and welcome you to the show. Marco, how are you doing?
Much.
Welcome.
Well, I'm doing good. The new year just has started. It's snowing here in the Netherlands. Although right now, if I look outside, the sun is shining, but it's pretty cold. But next to it, I'm in a warm house, so I feel privileged, and I'm doing good.
Great, good to hear that. And I'm sure as you were talking before our show that you're going to come to Dubai, I'm sure you're going to enjoy the weather here, about 20 degrees, and
I will.
That's going to be a good change for you.
I will, yeah.
Marco, so I'm really excited to really talk about your work around polarity management. I think without talking about anything else, and let's dive into the work that you do around polarity management. Tell me what it is really, for anyone who doesn't know much about polarity management or knows nothing about it. Tell me what it is for our listeners to understand.
Yeah. So if we start to talk about polarities and want to explain it, if you would allow me, I want to do a short exercise with you. It's a short breathing exercise, not like meditation or mindfulness, but just so that you have a physical experience what it means, polarities. And for those who are listening, feel free to join also in this exercise so that you can experience what it means to talk about polarities. So if I may invite you just to breathe in and then hold your breath, Haris. So just breathe in and then hold it. Now, if you talk about polarities always have two sides. Like breathing also has two sides. You just took a breath in, and the in-breath has value. So it's important for the body, but don't breathe out yet. So it's important, and you can actually do it even more. So try to breathe in a little bit more. And you might even overdo it. And, if you take it from polarities, don't exhale. So keep it. So what you notice right now, just doing only in-breath is doable, and also with your mind, you can put your mind to it, do it even more. And that's what we do in life. Sometimes we need to act and we need to work hard, and then with our minds, we keep working harder. And although even right now, you might start to notice there's a physical tendency, an urge to breathe out. Don't breathe out.
No, impossible, Marco.
It's tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's tough. But you see, but now you're breathing out. So just breathe out and only breathe out. You see, the out breath is also another side of the polarity, in breath and out breath. The out breath has value because it releases CO2, and you can breathe out even more without breathing in. So again, what you see, if you only breathe out and you breathe out even more, and with your mind, you can put your mind to it, it actually is possible. But at some point, the tension starts in your body and you feel the urge to breathe in, but you stick to the out breath, and you can do it, and you can even extend it longer until you can't. And then you will breathe in again. Now, just breathe normal again, Haris. So let me explain about what polarities means. If you look at the definition of polarities, those are two opposite forces. The in-breath and the out-breath are opposite forces. Both of the opposite forces have a value. The in-breath brings in the oxygen, the out-breath releases the CO2. They're also on a continuum, because you can decide to breathe in deeper and then shallow out-breath, or you can do more out-breath and less in-breath. So it's on a scale. and they are interdependent. And this is crucial. They are interdependent. You need both of them. So you need the in-breath followed by the out-breath, and the out-breath followed by the in-breath. If you only do in-breath or out-breath, you will die. It's not going to work. Now, that's the physical explanation of a polarity. Now, if you translate it into our lives, so let's talk about IQ and EQ. IQ, the intellect, the functional side, is one side of the polarity, and EQ, the relational, the emotion piece, is the other side. Those are two opposite forces. Both have value. The functional, the IQ, the rational, it helps you define your needs, it helps you define your visions, it helps you to create plans, and so on. But you also need the other side of the polarity, the EQ, because also in business or in families, it's people. And then we need to talk about connection. So the EQ side also is needed. So in order to connect, to be trustworthy, also to sense and so on, and to celebrate. Now, if you look at like life, in life you need both IQ and EQ, functional, relational, the doing and the being piece. Now, from polarity thinking, what you see is that sometimes people, they are sticking to one side of the polarity. I know people with whom I'm working as a coach, as an executive coach, who are, for instance, mostly IQ driven. So they drive business, and they drive it well, and they get the numbers, they get the results. But sometimes they overdo the IQ. They push the others around them to do even more. And that causes stress into the teams and the organizations. Or people are neglecting it, or people are getting into a burnout. So it's good to have the IQ, but if you overdo it, it will come with a price. Now, if you have IQ and you overdo, then the invitation is to also bring in the EQ. So the people who are really strong on the IQ, they probably need to learn also to come with the EQ, to be more vulnerable and more connective, and also to be open and listen and be transparent even about their emotions. But what happens in polarity is also, if you want to go there underneath the EQ, for some people, there's also a fear. And the fear is that, like, but if I don't show up as a strong person, they will see me as weak, as a fluffy person, as a I don't have any ideas kind of person. So because of that fear, then their escape route is to go back to the IQ. So in short, polarities. What we need to work when working with polarities, it's about helping to see that people, rather than focusing on one side, being strong on only IQ or EQ, you have to embrace both sides. But if you want to learn how to embrace both sides, you have to see what's the downside. And if the IQ person, which I was myself, by the way, in the past, and I can tell you a little bit of a story later on if you'd like, I used my IQ to protect myself, to be strong, to be likable, to be seen, although I was causing stress. And when I needed to learn to also come with the EQ and to embrace it, of course, when you would tell me, Mark, you need to be more vulnerable, I said, yeah, I understand. But a fear underneath kept me away from it. And if I wanted to improve the EQ piece, and that's part of the polarity thinking, you have to look for the fear that's underneath. And if you don't deal with the fear, then probably you will never get to the EQ piece. Now, secondly, why is polarity thinking also important? If you look at like leadership in an organization, sometimes we're trying to fix issues by just looking at one side of the polarity. There's also, for instance, there's the HR department, and it's centralized. And then you come in, Haris, for instance, as the new CEO, and then you start to talk with your unit managers, and they say, Haris, the centralization of HR is not always beneficial for us as a unit, because HR is not always aware about our specific unit needs. And you have some more conversations with other unit managers as well, and they come with the same message, and you say, oh gosh, here's an issue. You know what? I'm going to decentralize. Okay, so you decentralize. And in the initial months, it works out pretty fine. They feel seen, they feel supported, but then they also start to see like the downside of too much centralization, decentralization. They say, listen, now I have some ask, but I don't have this specialized people, or they don't know have all the skills. And you go, yeah, that's true. So maybe spreading out HR in all the subunits is not always helpful. Maybe we should centralize again. So here's an issue, and we're going to fix it by centralization again. Now, what you see in this example is if you take opportunities or if you take challenges like this and you only talk about centralization or there's a fix decentralization, by the way, centralization, decentralization are polarities. Those are opposite forces, both having value on a scale and are interdependent. If you only fix it as an issue, oh, no, not enough support, let's decentralize. Oh, not enough knowledge, experience, let's centralize. Then you're trying to fix an issue. And what you need to learn, though, in your leadership or in your life, is that many of the challenges that we find in our lives are not issues to be fixed by one side, but are polarities that we need to manage. So the real question is, how can we find the optimal balance between centralization and decentralization rather than trying to fix the issues of the unit managers? So let me pause here. I know you gave a short question and I'll give you a long answer here.
No, thank you. I think it was really a detailed explanation of polarity. And so what I understood is polarity is really about the opposite forces in any situation.
Embracing the opposite forces.
Embracing meaning the management of polarities is about embracing the opposite forces, right?
Yes.
So it's very applicable, Marco, in anything that people do in life, right? I mean, it's not just about centralization or decentralization at work, but also I think families, systems at home, and anything that we do has got polarity. Tell me how, for a layman, understanding polarity will benefit them.
So I think I didn't hear the whole question. How for a
layman, for someone who just does not know anything, but they do not want to really, not at work, but in personal life, the understanding of polarity, how does it help people? Yeah.
So let me give you another practical example how that might work out in a personal life. So for instance, I know people who are really loyal to their friends. And they say it's important to be loyal to your friends, and when they reach out for help or support, I'll be there. Just give me a call. I'll do what I can. If you need some support, with money or practical activities or so, I'll be there for you, Haris. I'm your friend. I'm loyal to you. Now, what this person also needs to see is like there's also something as too much loyalty in your friendships. Because if you always ask me, so Marco, help me out, and I always spend time with you as my friend, trying to help you and serve you, and I give you my money and so on, some point I lose myself. I'm always out there, and if there's more friends, I might get exhausted at some point as well. So if you overdo it and give yourself away constantly, you don't have any downtime for yourself, it might stress you out. Or it might lead you, if I give everyone my money, to my own financial issues. So from a polarity perspective, being loyal to others but overdoing and giving yourself away, the invitation is, can I also be loyal to myself? So this is also by doing a polarity map. We call it polarity mapping. I can see being loyal to others has value. If I overdo it, I give myself away. So the invitation is to be more loyal to myself. But if I then explore the polarity map, but what keeps me away from being loyal to myself is also the fear that I might be seen as egoistic. And I don't want to be seen as egoistic, I want to be likable. So probably if that fear kicks in, that someone, for instance, says like, normally you if you ask me, I'll be there, and then suddenly I don't, and you tell me, oh Marco, why are you so egoistic? All triggers come into my mind, And my defense, my coping mechanism to be with the triggers is to go back to what I know, being loyal to others. So you see in that personal example, personal life example, being loyal to others, overdoing, giving yourself away. Therefore, I need to learn to be loyal to myself. But the fear is that I'm perceived as egoistic, and I go back. If you would actually start mapping this and you start discussing it, then you will figure out, you will see that if you would look where are you spending most of your energy, is probably on the side of being loyal to others and giving myself away. And I spend not that much time on being loyal to myself and maybe also embracing the fear of being egoistic. So what I need to learn is to balance it more out. And maybe I should say at some point, Haris, I like you. You're my friend. I want to spend time with you. I want to help you. I want to support you. But you also need to respect my boundaries. And I'm going to hold my boundaries by also saying no every now and then, because I want to be with myself. I want to be with my family, or I want to play golf or whatever. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, and so it's really now about mapping the polarity mapping, as you call it, right? So
correct,
managing the polarity through mapping it, right? That's correct. How it is. I get
correct.
it. So talk to me a little bit more about polarity mapping. How do we do once? Because I also understand sometimes we don't know what are we not focusing on.
Correct. I'm absolutely with you.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely with you. Yeah. So, well, thank you for that question as well. Well, first of all, I would say, I'm going to send you that document where it's also in detail being explained on what polarity mapping is and how it works. And, if you would also be willing to share it also to the listeners who are interested, so that they can just download it. It will help it will serve them. Now, if you don't know how and where to start, I would say start with something that you're really proud of. So would you be willing to be part of a short experiment that we do a little bit of a polarity mapping just shortly with you?
Sure.
So Haris, if you look at something, a strength of yours that you feel like, I'm really proud on that strength, I'm really good at it. And if you would ask my friends, they would also say, yeah, that's a strength that I'm really good at. What stands out? What's that strength for yours?
I think my relationship management with people.
Your relationship management with people. So what makes you so good in relationship management?
I think people tell me you're always there. You're there, you help, and you're somebody we can reach out to, and so relationship is my strength. Yeah.
So relationship. So this is one side of the polarity. So you're strong in relationship. It sounds like you're trustworthy. We can build on you, and so on. Now, if you take this part, relationship, what happens if you overdo it? Yeah, what's that laugh there?
Yeah, sometimes I think you prioritize others than yourself, and a lot of things that you want to do, but because relationship is a value and you want to be maintaining it, I think you give away yourself.
Yeah. So you give away yourself, you prioritize others. What's the impact on yourself if you're in this situation when you overdo it?
There are times that I think what's important gets ignored. I mean, what's important for me gets ignored because I'm busy maintaining and managing and handling my relationship.
There you go. Yeah. So what we just currently explored is one side of the polarity. So you're good in relationships, and then you give yourself away. And if you start looking at polarity mapping, we can raise many more questions on both quadrants, because the top left quadrant is the quadrant of your strength. And I could also raise a question, what's your definition of this strength? What's the importance? What are the values around it? What's the impact on others? What's the impact on business? What's the impact on friendships? What's the impact on your family? And so on. So we could do a lot of exploration on that quadrant. And then we said also, if you overdo it, where you give yourself away, we could also even explore that quadrant much more, like, what are the times or the circumstances that you overdo it? What's the impact? What's the downside? What's the impact on yourself, on the others, on the business, and so on? Now, we have one side of the polarity, your relationships and when you overdo it. So what's the invitation for you then? Because you ignore also elements that are important to you. So what's the invitation? What should you do more often then, maybe?
I think it's about balancing then,
Mm-hmm.
because you doing something and you're not happy with it, and you do not want to not do it, and you do not want to be not happy also.
But what is it that you want to balance? Because you do relationships. So what's the opposite pole then? What is it that you want to balance out here?
I think self and others. Yeah.
Ah, good. So you see relationship or others is one side, you overdo it, you ignore yourself. So now we get to the top right quadrant, the opposite of the polarity, relationship or others versus self. So what does self mean to you? What does it mean if you spend time with self?
Yeah. So I think it's about recognizing what's more important, between self and other, and then making a choice and then taking action.
Yeah, but that's already, now you're already talking about balancing the polarity. But if we really stick to the self, what's the importance of also spending time with self or focusing on self? What's the importance for you?
I think that's also a value, kind of your inner satisfaction of really spending time with yourself, that you're doing something that you like doing and you want to do.
Yeah.
And that gives a space for self, right? I mean,
Beautiful.
I say slow down to speed up.
Yeah,
So
slow down to speed up.
To speed up. So that's a moment. I mean, if you prioritize yourself, you kind of slow down in that space for yourself, so that when you go back, you kind of speed up for everybody else.
Beautiful. So you see, even in the short conversation, there's already different elements that we could write down in the top right quadrant, where it's all about self. Now, if you would also go to the bottom right quadrant, what's the fear? What's the worst that people could say if you would focus maybe too much on self? What's the worst that could happen here?
I think for me, it's getting disconnected then.
And then what if you're getting disconnected?
That's not the space I would like to be in.
No.
So because others are important.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. But what's the worst that could happen if you're disconnected?
What's the worst thing that can happen? I would not like it. I think nothing worse than that. Yeah. It's just that I won't like it. That's not me then.
That's not me then. You see, so if you get to a situation where you say that's not me, I'm disliking it, I'm disconnected, then probably what is your strategy, the coping mechanism to move away from that zone is you go back to the top left quadrant of connection, of the relationship. So you see, you asked me, how do I start crafting the polarity? How do I start noticing how polarity works within my lives? This is one simple entry point. Start with something that you're really good at, you're really proud of, that you are being recognized for. Explore what it means, how it shows up, what it brings to you, others, and so on. Then explore, what if you overdo it? What are the downsides for yourself, for others, for business, for relationships, organizations? When you explore it, then you see, but what's the invitation then? In your case, to focus more on self. So that's relationship and self are the polarities. And then you start exploring the fear. And the point is, if you have this foundation, you have to start the foundation of polarity mapping, but you're not there yet. You could even say, if you look like the overdoing and the fears, if you would bring them together, you might see a deeper fear. The deeper fear might be something like, I'm not likable. For instance, I'm not saying that is your deeper fear, but if you do your polarity mapping and you start to explore what's underneath the bottom quadrants, you will find your deeper fear. But also, if you learn to balance both relationship and self,
Mm.
you probably will find what we call the higher purpose.
Mm.
So, do you have any
So
idea what your higher purpose might be then, also with relationship and self?
yeah, I think before I answer your question, Marco,
Yeah,
I want to understand more about in
yeah,
between. You're saying you're to figure out the higher purpose.
yeah,
Yeah. How does that happen? I mean, how do you find out higher purpose in managing polarity?
yeah. Well, I think how do you find out insights in general? It
Mm.
requires slowing down before you speed up, like you
Mm-hmm.
said. It
Right.
requires the willingness
Mm.
to explore, to go in yourself. It
Mm.
requires the willingness to be truthful to yourself, to see the beautiful sides of you as well as the dark sides, your strengths and
Mm.
your weaknesses. And the more you have the courage
Mm.
to open up,
Mm.
to look inwards, to see the truth, what's happening
Mm.
within you. And the more you start to see it, and more you start thinking about those elements, and you start having honest and open conversations and vulnerable
Mm.
conversations with others,
Mm.
the more you start seeing, like, but what is really driving me in this life? So if I would relate it to myself, if I look at myself, the doing and the being piece are
Mm.
both important. And in the past, I was mostly focusing on the doing piece. My
Mm.
parents were divorced in a young age.
Mm.
I was ashamed for it. I felt vulnerable. And my
Mm.
coping mechanism to deal with that situation is to live from my IQ, from my head, and to be a
Mm.
strong leader and powerful, and getting things done, getting results. Because if I get the results, people are going to like me. Now, I
Mm.
was overdoing it. I caused stress myself in the system. Sometimes I was not that nice as a manager, if I can
Mm.
honestly say. So I needed to learn to show, be more vulnerable and open, and so on. But again, for me, the fear was like, but what if I get fluffy? I don't. I'm not being seen here, so I'm not
Mm.
likable anymore.
Mm.
So what I found is also now much more balanced. I'm focusing strongly on both the doing. When I'm working as a coach, we're doing the work to get results. Also, other
Mm.
people, they want to get results in life. But
Mm.
life is not only about results. Life is also about connection. It's also about the vulnerability. It's about the empathy.
Mm.
So I've learned how to balance much more the IQ and the EQ, the doing and the being.
Mm.
Now, if you look like from the polarity, the doing and
Mm.
the being, the IQ and the EQ, the functional and relational, what is my higher purpose? What I notice more and more that I believe also, for instance, in business, I believe that we can aim for strong business
Mm.
results and
Mm.
strong organizations while
Mm.
still also coming from humanity.
Mm.
And that is part of my higher purpose, to combine business results and humanity. I believe in both. We don't need to choose to either focus on humanity or to either focus on business results. We can do both. And my higher purpose is to pass on that message to the world. And that's also, again, one of the reasons I said yes to you when you invited
Mm.
me for this podcast, to say, yes, of
Mm.
course, more
Mm.
than willing to share my knowledge. Because
Mm.
I believe that the knowledge will contribute to connected worlds,
Mm.
where we focus on both elements,
Mm.
results and humanity.
Thank you, Marco, for that beautiful answer there on how to understand the purpose. Marco, you also mentioned initially about a story, personal story you said that you have that
Yeah,
got you into polarity thinking and polarity management.
yeah,
Tell me a little bit about that as well.
yeah. So I think I just already opened up a little bit like that personal story. Like I said, I think I already opened. So if you look at my life, I come from a family,
Mm-hmm.
a father, mother, and I have three brothers, and
Mm-hmm.
we were quite a nice family together. I think until the age of 8 or so.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing nicely, fine, happy. We had a good life. And then I noticed that my parents more and more, start to have a little bit of fights and
Mm-hmm.
disconnect. And until they divorced when I was at the age of 12.
Mm-hmm.
Now that divorce hit me hard. Um, and I found it hard to cope with it,
Mm.
So my coping mechanism wasn't also to please constantly, to be a nice boy. And I totally
Mm.
lost contact with who I am and what I wanted. And whenever someone asked me something, I would say, yes, of course, I'm going to do it.
Mm.
Then I went to the military academy. And at the military academy, I also felt when I went there that like the way I was leading my life, always giving myself away, is not sustainable. So I made a
Mm.
choice. No one knows me here at the military academy, and I'm gonna create a new Marco. And that
Mm.
Marco was primarily living from his head. So
Mm.
I was highly IQ driven. I'm intelligent. I can learn fast. I understand things quickly. So it was also my mechanism to show, like, if don't fool with me, because if you think you can make quick jokes with me, I will make even quicker jokes back and push you down
Mm.
using my intellect, and
Mm.
on my toes. Um, Also, by when I start to work, I make long hours, because if I make long hours, I'll deliver results. So what I somehow taught myself, if I work hard, if I study hard, if I take on a lot of responsibilities, I will have a beautiful career, I will have money, I will have nice holidays, and therefore I'll be happy, I'll be successful, and I'll be the king of the mountain. So I was living on one side of the polarity, highly
Mm.
IQ driven, highly functional, highly focusing on like what needs to be done.
Mm.
At the same time, also neglecting many other things. For
Mm.
instance, one of the things I started to neglect my family. I was
Mm.
married, I had two young kids, but I worked
Mm.
long hours from early in the morning till in the evening when I got back home and do
Mm.
some dinner. Then after dinner, I start to work again. So just being too much on the IQ while overdoing it, I neglected, for instance, my family. I disconnected from my family. Sometimes I was stressed. Even one time I remember, my laptop crashed and
Mm.
I needed to fix it. So I went off to the organization, but it was closed because it was Saturday morning.
Mm. Mm.
So you can see by overdoing, it was not working. So that's
Mm.
also when I really felt like I need to start doing something, because although I'm successful in life, I'm
Mm.
not fulfilled. And I noticed more and
Mm.
more like the long hours were taking a toll, the disconnection with the family was taking its toll. So I started to
Mm.
work with my own coaches. I
Mm.
started to start looking inwards. And my coach also showed me that although my strong IQ brought me a lot of success, it also
Mm.
has its flaws and its downsides. And I
Mm.
started through the conversation accept it more and more. So he
Mm.
also asked me at some point, now, this is what you do. This is also the downside. What's the
Mm.
invitation here? What is it that you would like to do more differently?
Mm.
And I told him, like, I want to, I'm in a way, I want to connect to people, but I'm scared to connect. I'm yearning to be vulnerable, but I'm afraid that it might be misused. And he said, I understand. So basically, that's the polarity already kicking in,
Mm.
the
Mm.
IQ, but I want to be more vulnerable, reveal myself, and more connection to others. And we
Mm.
started to talk also about what are the fears underneath. Now,
Mm.
backwards, I understand what he was doing. He was actually talking about the polarities, although he didn't mention the words.
Mm.
So more and more, I started to feel and to sense, and I
Mm.
started to experiment, and I started to look inside and see what's the
Mm.
fear that's here, and I
Mm.
started to accept that I also could sometimes be
Mm.
disconnected. That
Mm.
it's also sometimes okay not to be
Right.
liked, for instance. And
Right.
through the work that I've done, the internal work, I've learned to balance out both sides.
Mm. Mm.
Now, this is me over time, uh, quite some years, because this was
Mm.
deep. But I'm not saying that this is an example, therefore, polarity mapping and balancing out polarities always takes a lifetime to embrace.
Mm.
But on
Mm.
this aspect, it took me many years to embrace
Mm.
both.
Mm.
And here I am. And, when I started to work as a coach, I always worked with also the different aspects until a
Mm.
couple of years back. I've heard about polarities. And that's
Mm.
where it hit me. And I started to reflect and say, like, Oh, so all the work that I have done myself was about balancing polarities. But as an executive coach, when I work with my clients or as a trainer, facilitator for leadership programs, actually what I'm doing is I'm trying to show to people and learn them to embrace how to deal with both opposite
Mm,
sides, to embrace
mm,
polarity.
mm,
And that's where polarities landed in my life.
mm, mm. Interesting story. And I think, Marco, a lot of us live that life where we just don't recognize that our focus is not right to keep focusing on one side or one aspect of things. I think we really need to look at polarities, the opposite forces.
Yeah.
That really is about becoming more aware
Yeah.
of self and doing that introspection, that reflection to see the other sides of it. So beautifully explained, Marco. Uh, so, Marco, I'm curious to hear from you now. How do you think that learning about polarity management that helps leaders in their leadership style,
Yeah.
organizations? How can they? Because we were talking about polarity management from a personal life perspective.
Yeah.
Let's look at it from leadership
Yeah.
management and
Sure.
for as managers. So how do you think they can apply, and
Yeah.
what do you think will be the benefit of it?
Yeah. So it starts by acknowledging that probably there are more polarities in life than humans on the
Hmm.
planet.
Hmm.
There's every polarities are everywhere. So
Hmm.
for instance, when we start to talk about teams, of
Hmm.
course we should talk about the teams from a perspective like what are your objectives? What
Hmm.
are your tasks, your roles, responsibilities? What are
Hmm.
our decision making processes?
Hmm.
You could say those are all more rational designed elements which
Hmm.
are needed in order to produce results.
Hmm. Hmm.
But as a leader, I also need to accept that at least for now, I'm not saying in 20 years from now how it will be, but at least for
Hmm.
now that most of the work is done by humans, by people.
Hmm.
You can have beautiful processes, but you also need the people to work around them, where they
Hmm.
connect, where they reach out to each other, where they, push back on each other, where they also complement each other,
Hmm.
and so on. So as a leader, I should not only be strong in setting the tone and setting the objectives, but I
Hmm.
also need to see that I need to empathize, that I
Hmm.
also need to lean in, that my part of my role is also to create an energy field in an
Hmm.
organization where people feel safe and supported and
Hmm.
invited to be vulnerable, to show up, to make mistakes, that it's okay to make mistakes. So you see, what you do see in leadership development is actually learning to embrace the polarities. We need to
Hmm.
talk about structure, but we also need to talk about culture.
Hmm.
It's great to
Hmm.
talk about profit, and most organizations we always talk about profit.
Hmm.
But when and where do we also talk, for instance, about happiness, which could be the
Hmm.
opposite of profit
Hmm.
and happiness?
Hmm.
Or when we talk about delivering results,
Hmm.
we produce also outcomes that
Hmm.
that is needed. Um, but how do we that in a way that is also sustainable?
Hmm. Hmm.
At some point, the Earth cannot
Hmm.
produce all the elements. So we need to start thinking also how can we create sustainable products rather than
Hmm.
just new products. And that even leads to questions as the leader. We're always pushing new products. How can we also reuse old products?
Hmm.
Or how
Hmm.
can we make our products so
Hmm.
good that they
Hmm.
only need our product once per 10 years?
Hmm.
But that will have a huge impact, of course, in our
Hmm.
financial system.
Hmm.
And if you really start to look like what are the opposite forces here in your leadership, this is also where you really start noticing, new questions arise, challenging questions arise as a leader. And well, I think that's where it gets started to really
Hmm.
work on polarity management in leadership. So,
Hmm.
in short, if you are open for polarity management and polarity mapping,
Hmm.
you will start asking all kind of new questions,
Hmm.
maybe even challenging questions, or even questions where you say like, I'm not sure if I want to go there because
Hmm.
it will have an impact on the profit loss
Hmm.
or my shares.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but it starts with, are you willing to go there?
Hmm.
And you can actually see that. Maybe that's the part, the last, Harris. You know, I've written this book, The Connection Quotient, where I
Yeah.
say it starts with the connection with yourself, with other, with the team, with the organization, and the world. And at all those levels, you will
Hmm.
see polarities.
Hmm.
In, for instance, in the combination in working with the others, we should talk about how do we collaborate. What do you need
Hmm.
from me? From a business side, how to get the best results. But
Hmm.
we also should talk from a leadership
Hmm.
perspective, also on the human
Hmm.
side. What can I do to support you,
Hmm.
to help you grow, not only as a functional being, as
Hmm.
an employer or as a leader,
Hmm.
but also as a good father
Right.
or as a friend.
Yeah. And I, what I'm noticing now is it's so it's really about shifting perspective and seeing the other sides of things.
And
And
seeing the
yeah,
value of the other side, opposing
value.
forces
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
might neglect.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. So it's really about a 180-degree view,
Yeah.
expanded 180-degree view
Yeah.
over thing, because polarity is like when the one side of it is something different that you're focusing on, and the other side is
Yeah.
different, which you're not focusing on. So it's more of a 180-degree view
Yeah. Yeah.
of things. And yeah.
And what I would add here,
Hmm.
it is indeed 180 degrees, but I think if you look at polarity mapping, one of the fundamental rules is it's not about choosing the one over the other. It's not like
Hmm.
A or B.
Hmm.
It's about and how can I do
Hmm.
on this side of the polarity and also integrate
Hmm.
the other side.
Hmm.
So, and again, I think from a leadership perspective, sometimes we're trying to fix issues by finding a quick solution, which
Hmm.
only is being supported by one side of the polarity. But how can you actually, rather than fixing, trying to find a solution that is embracing both
Hmm.
sides of the polarities?
Hmm. Hmm.
And that also leads to the distinction between what I would call there's a problem to
Hmm.
be fixed, or
Hmm.
no. Let me rephrase it by an example. So when you decided to
Hmm.
invite me
Hmm.
to be part of this podcast,
Hmm.
that's not a polarity. That
Hmm.
is a choice.
Hmm. Right.
You think about the pros and the cons. You think
Hmm.
about, does it actually also bring value to my listeners? Does it
Hmm.
relate to my higher purpose? And then at some point you said yes. So that's not
Hmm.
a polarity. This is a yes no, which has an end point, and the end point is you invited me into this podcast, and here we are.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So that decision is not a polarity to be managed.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, if you look at though at like, do we want to collaborate? And
Hmm.
if we start collaborating, no, not the question do we, but if we start collaborating together,
Hmm.
then we probably also need to find a way to collaborate in a way that works for you as well as works for me.
Hmm.
And this is also where we probably need to like start exploring the polarities of what's the business side
Hmm.
of our collaboration, but also what's the personal side.
Hmm.
Because I
Hmm.
believe in doing business is not
Hmm.
just doing business for results, but I
Hmm.
believe in long-term friendships. I
Right.
believe that also in business, if you can create your clients and turn them into friends, into
Hmm.
trustworthy relationships where you can actually
Hmm.
also have deeper conversations about personal issues, for instance.
Hmm. Hmm.
That is something unique, that is lasting, and of course it also creates a competitive advantage
Right.
because
Hmm.
you're strong.
Hmm.
So you inviting me for the podcast is not a polarity, that's a choice. Yes, no,
Hmm.
you said yes. But
Hmm.
if we would want to explore, to working together, then
Hmm.
we probably need to talk about polarities, both on
Hmm.
what does it mean from a business as well as from a personal perspective.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I'm all about both.
Right. Right. And that's what polarity management is about, right? I mean, opposite forces and really considering everything, and
Yeah,
then creating a balancing act
yeah,
between the two.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes, and So here's the end to it, because it doesn't mean that you always have to balance. So, for instance, if we take the polarity between being directive, being direction, I tell you, and to fully empower people, so that you're spacious. Directive versus spacious. Now, as a leader, I could ask myself, now, how can I be directive and spacious at the same time? And how does it work out? And as a leader, I would suggest find a great balance where you can do both, being directive and spacious. But what if you're the leader and you're in a situation, we're both in a situation where there are 20 people in the house and the house is on fire? Maybe in that situation, if it's your house and you know how it works and you know where the doors are and so on, and there's a lot of smoke, maybe we shouldn't be too polarity minded and trying to balance both being directive and spacious. Maybe that's the moment where we would say, Haris, be directive and tell us what to do, where are the doors, what's the way out, and how can we also extinguish the fire. So given the circumstances, it's absolutely okay to be in that situation on only one side of the polarity and being directive. Whereas there might also be situations where you say, you know what, let's be fully spacious. Let's see what happens here.
Yeah. And I think what I'm thinking is, accepting one side of it sometimes it's difficult for people because that's not something that they want to be or they want to do.
Yeah. And from polarity mapping, if you start noticing that you're neglecting one side of the polarity for whatever the reasons, I always say then start looking what's the fear underneath. Because until the moment you start accepting the fear and you start dealing with the fear, then you start acting on it. There's this definition of courage. And it says courage is not the absence of fear, rather knowing that something else is more important than the fear itself. So back to the polarities, my own polarity in the past, I wanted to be much more from the EQ, much more sensitive, compassionate, and vulnerable. But my fear was, but what if I become fluffy? What if people say, like, Marco, forget it, he's a no-go getter, So the more I had the courage to look inwards, to see, like, that's my fear, and is that actually true? And by the way, if some people think I'm fluffy, is that bad? Does everyone need to think I'm a nice guy? It's impossible. And the more I've learned, the more it also gave me permission just to be vulnerable, to show up in who I am, and also to accept that some people might dislike me. That's okay. So again, if you notice there's one side of the polarity that you're neglecting, then look like underneath what are the fears that are holding me back. Work around those fears. Start challenging those fears. Start seeing like what's the truth and what's not the truth. And the more you do, and the more you're at peace with the fear, you will see that the side that you're neglecting becomes easier to actually execute.
And accept, ultimately accept.
Absolutely. Yeah. And integrate. We might even say to integrate. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's really about being courageous, I think, recognizing what you're not recognizing and then integrating it.
Yeah. No, I'm absolutely with you. I'm also on the spiritual path, and it's the path of the Shambhala warrior. Now, if you look at the warrior, it's like, it might have a bit of a negative connotation. Because a warrior, it's fighting and creates blood and it's maybe killing. But if you look also at the Shambhala warrior, the essence is not like, I'm going to fight you. But the warrior actually means I have the courage. And it invites me to have the courage to look inwards, to be truly honest to myself, to accept my beautiful sides and my dark sides, my strengths and my weaknesses, to go inwards. And like you said, that takes courage, because you're going to see, and I'm going to see some less nice sides of me. I'm 57 now, and I've seen some of my sides, and I accepted that some of the past experiences or some past activities that I've done have not always been the best for others, not even sometimes the best for me. But out of, I wanted to be seen, wanted to be seen as powerful and strong, I did it anyway. And right now, on the path of the spiritual path of the Shambhala warrior, it's really for me about having the courage to look inwards. And therefore, I'm also working with my mentor, my spiritual teacher, who helps me to hold up the mirror every month for me to look like, okay, so what are the situations that I'm in, and what does it say about me? Because it's so easy to judge others. That's the easiest. It takes courage to ask yourself, what is my responsibility here? And rather than judging someone else, can I take responsibility for my own behavior, for my own actions, and see how my polarity might be unbalanced in this situation? But yeah, it takes courage. Absolutely.
Yeah. And have you found out, I mean, working such a vast experience that you carry, Marco, have you found out that the organizations where leaders don't find themselves ready to see, situations from polarities perspectives?
Of course. Yeah.
And what happens then?
Well, let's also make a distinction between, is it learnable for some or not? I've encountered some narcissistic people. It's easy now to say it's impossible for them to learn it. But I'm not going to say that. I don't have the skills to be with narcissistic people, to hold them beautifully in such a way so that I can actually invite them in to start seeing the polarity and maybe embracing the polarity. I simply don't have the skill set. So I do encounter people who are not willing to go there for whatever reasons, or not capable for whatever reasons. But I also feel quite fortunate that I work with people from all around the globe, where I can actually have those conversations, and where actually can also, through the conversation, that they start seeing that actually by opening up and seeing, like you said, the 180 degrees perspective, the opposite perspectives, and having the courage and the willingness to explore those different perspectives and see how that actually adds to better decision making, then suddenly you see a breakthrough. So I believe that in essence, people can work with polarities, but through either circumstances or mental states, not everyone might be capable to actually act on it. And again, simply, I cannot be with everyone. So I would like narcissistic people. It's not going to work for me, because I'm being triggered by narcissistic people. I'm being triggered by them.
Yeah. And I think it's not about whether people are capable or not, but also about what do they want to,
are they willing?
View differently, are they willing, there could be times that the same leader will be willing to look at things differently for something and not for something else. So it's also very situational and
absolutely
depends on circumstances.
So, right. Absolutely. And what I see, that sometimes it also takes a live event for people to really see, like, wow, if you're like 45, 46 and suddenly a dear friend passes away, it makes you realize, like, life is short and can be over before you know. And that might be the trigger that someone says, like, normally I'm working 14 hours a day. Maybe I should start seeing, like, what else is there in life, and actually seeing, like, there's work. And there's also, the private life, which is a polarity. There's a work life and a personal life. Those could be the polarities. But sometimes it also takes such a situation before you go there.
Right. I think, and that shifts, that changes the perspective of how we view and look at situations in life. Right.
But what I hope for, that also the listeners of this podcast, that they also start coming from curiosity and say, like, wow, how does it show up in my life? Not only in my business life, but also in my personal life. And then again, like you said beautifully early in the podcast, are you willing to slow down before you speed up? Because in the slowing down, and not only in the reflecting on your actions, but also the willingness to do introspection on your drivers, because that's what we're talking about. Then you start seeing also like, where am I, and how I am I balancing those opposite forces. Yeah.
Really a 30,000 feet, perspective and view of situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, first go there, and then the question is now bring it back to some applicable actions. And what I always suggest is, if you start having those insights, don't come with like good intentions, with like a long list of 15 or 20 actions, but make it like short, sweet, and simple. And I always suggest to use the frame start, stop, continue. When you have some insights, what is it from a behavioral point of view, what you want to start doing differently? What is that you might want to stop doing in your behavior? And where do you also celebrate, but this is what I'm doing good, so I want to continue doing. And then start acting on it. And at some point you notice it's starting to become normal. You start to integrate it in who you are and how you show up and how you work and how you're with friends. And then you take another piece and say like, okay, let's explore another polarity and see what opens up from there again.
And it's an ongoing process, I think, never-ending journey of self.
For sure. By the time we die, you or me, I know, there will be enough to explore. But life's over. Time's up. Yeah.
True.
I always say your inbox will always be filled. So your inbox also, your growth inbox will always be filled with challenges and reflections that you want to work on. Yeah.
And I like that, simple technique of start, stop, and continue for your own actions and behaviors and life situations in general. I think similarly, I'm curious, Marco, if we can discuss, are there a few questions that we can ask ourselves to get into polarity management or thinking with polarity?
Yeah. Well, my first answer would be, for the listener, download the PDF that you can put with the podcast, because and on one of the pages after the explanation, you'll see the different quadrants with multiple questions. But if I want to bring it back to the essence, if you start with the top left quadrant, that's start with a strength. Just ask yourself, so what is a strength of mine? What am I being recognized for? What am I proud of? What do other people tell about me, as my strength? And then when you have that strength, ask yourself, what's the definition of this strength? How would I define it? And what's the value of this strength? Why is this important? And what makes it important for me? But also, what's the importance for being in family relationships or in business relationships? And what does it bring to others? So those would be a couple of questions for that quadrant. Then you go to the quadrant of overdoing this strength. And then just ask yourself, so what happens if I overdo it? What are the circumstances around that trigger me going into the overdoing mode? And when I overdo it, what's the impact on myself? What's the impact on the others? What's the impact on the business, on relationships? Now, then you go to the top right quadrant. So that's the opposite of this strength, the initial strength. So when you're overdoing, ask yourself that question. So what's the invitation here? If I overdo something, what's the invitation? If I overdo also to give compliments or to give myself away, the pleasing piece, when I do too much pleasing, then maybe the invitation is to take a stand, say no. So when you start looking, you start defining, so what's the invitation? How does it feel? How does it make me? What is the value of it? Why would I want to invest in this side? What do I expect to be different if I could integrate this side of the polarity in my life as well?
So it's really about strengths, identifying strengths, and then I see it more defining those strengths and finding out values of that, and then also looking at what if I overdo it,
and then
I look at what's the invitation now.
What's the invitation?
Yeah.
And then the final step is like when you define the invitation, have done some exploration, then ask yourself, now what's the fear? If I would overdo this strength as well, this invitation, what's the fear that's underneath? What is restricting me? What's holding me back in actually doing it? Because if I know this is important and I don't do it, so what's stopping me here? So you can do also that exploration around fears, and then you have the foundation of the polarity map. And when you have found it, then you can ask yourself, now where do I spend most of my time? In which quadrant? You know, and how would I like it to be? And you could even ask yourself, so what is my deeper fear? The bottom two quadrants, if I look at like overdoing it and my fear, what's the deeper fear? And if I take the top, is my deeper purpose? And then from there, you can start looking for, now what are the possible actions? What is something that I could actually do to start working to embrace more of both of the polarities rather than one side?
Right.
And then you already have a beautiful foundation for a polarity map.
So, Marco, we'll put the presentation and the handout that you shared with me for our listeners and for our viewers to download and have a copy and work through the template.
Yeah, perfect.
So, Marco, I think it has been an interesting conversation, Marco. I've been learning about polarity management and polarity thinking. I think everyone can apply in their life, with work and in personal life, and just see things differently and shift perspectives. Any final piece of advice for our listeners in terms of making it simple, and in terms of what would you advise about polarity management? How should they approach it?
I would say approach it as it's part of life. You know, life is made up of polarities, and don't conceptualize it too big. Don't even try to look for, when you start doing the polarity maps, what's the right words. I would say for each quadrant, find a name for the quadrants. Don't over IQ it. Don't overstructure it. Don't overanalyze it. Follow the flow. And if you land on a word that resonates for you, that has energy for you, and it works for you, but the rest of the world don't understand it, so what? It is your map. It is your name. And it's there to help you to be aware about the strengths. So independent what others say, just use the words that are yours, simplify it, and then have fun with it.
Yeah, and apply it.
Have fun with it.
Yeah,
play with it. And when it doesn't work, don't judge yourself on it. Just say like, okay, it didn't work. Great, I'm learning something new.
Yeah.
That would be my advice, I guess, for now.
No, thank you, Marco. I think that's a beautiful advice, to keep it simple and short and learn and have fun with learning. And Marco, I can't thank you enough for your time today on this show. Looking forward to meeting you in Dubai when you come in here. And thank you once again for your time today.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.